When this project kicked off, I guess the background to why we went down the path of looking at premium food and beverage production is relatively simple. The state at the time, 2015, had set a target to double the value of agriculture in Western Australia by 2025. Effectively, there are probably three ways in which you can double the value of agriculture. You can double the area under cultivation, you could double the yield from your existing areas of production, or you can double the value of the product you're actually producing. All of those are quite challenging, and for me, the 5 years prior to coming to this project, I was actually working on the first of those. So initiatives such as the Gascoyne Food Bowl and the Water Irrigation Program and Water for Food, really looking at how we could make available more water to then develop more high-value horticultural land. The focus of this project was really around saying, look, the areas in which we can be competitive are dependent on effectively our ability to differentiate. And I really enjoyed Venice's introduction this morning talking about, some of those historical product opportunities that were available in this region, because it's some of those elements, it's the things that can differentiate us from the general production of a commodity product that are fundamental to this project. I've just got back from 12 days in the US, and whilst I wasn't there specifically to look at anything related to agriculture or agriculture and food or value adding, it's a reminder every time I go there of the sheer scale of production and the sheer scale of the market that's available domestically to producers in the US. And it's a stark reminder to me about our need to differentiate, because our ability, we're just simply not a low-cost producer. There's very few product areas in which we're a low-cost producer. And even the areas where we historically have been low-cost producers and competitive technically, like broadacre cereal production, we now have significant competition from the Black Sea region and other regions that have now caught up in terms of technology and quite simply have other lower input costs than us. So, there are a number of areas, and you guys all know it, labour costs are comparatively high compared to many of our competitor peers. Continuing down the path of saying we're going to try and compete on price is, I guess, in my opinion, is quite challenging. So our focus was really around how do we look at moving towards high value product and product where we're differentiated in the marketplace and therefore can demand a price premium. For me, the project was really around saying, how can we assist businesses that are value adding in Western Australia and are differentiating product, and therefore trying to target those market segments where we can be competitive and we can grow. When we looked at Western Australia and how it compared, and this is 10-year growth in food and beverage export value, Western Australia is, on the far right of that graph, down around countries like Latvia, Kazakhstan, Taiwan. Probably not where we might think we would be in terms of our food and beverage export growth. And the same applies when you compare Western Australia to the other states in Western Australia. Performance is not competitive in that space. But we actually produce products that key markets and the world want. So this is basically just a graph of the export value of products we produce here in WA versus effectively the market size for those various products. And as you can see, in almost all of those categories, with the possible exception of beer and malt, we produce a very small portion of the potential market for those products. So it kind of begs the question, why has our growth been so constrained compared to peer nations and even other states? And what we touched on in the research was the fact that the mix of what we export is very different to those that are growing rapidly. So in the case of Western Australia, only 7% of our exports are what we would consider to be differentiated or significantly transformed from the raw product. 93% of our exports are effectively raw, or minimally processed. And if you then look at that by comparison to fast-growing nations and peers, it's a very different equation. So Western Australia on the far right, as you look at that graph, with 7% of our food and beverage products being significantly transformed, and then high growth nations on the left of that graph where it's 90, 80 and 70% of production in a processed form versus a far smaller percentage in a raw form. And that's just a graph of Western Australia versus the other states in Australia. And obviously the same applies, that the other states are transforming a far greater percentage of their product. We went down the path of saying, look, let's take a market-driven approach. Let's look at what key markets for us want, and are we producing those products, and can we ramp up production of those products? And effectively that was based on trade data, and we came up with a hit list of 20 key products. What I say to everyone as we travel around is that you can argue any product in or out, and that 20 is simply a list compiled by the consultants who worked for us of what they thought were the 20 best opportunities, but the underlying principles in terms of differentiating and then marketing a product can apply to many other product categories. So there were 20 key products across 9 platforms, and then we took a subsequent step to that, which was to then look at 20 high-value premium products. And we also looked at different regions. So in the case of the Great Southern, we looked at which of those products were being produced in the Great Southern, or there was interest in the Great Southern in producing those products, and there was some form of competitive advantage associated with that. I apologise for the graphics because I slotted this in last night, but I actually looked at, well, how do you guys market your region? When I went to the Great Southern website, I looked at some of those core characteristics that you're actually listing as key attributes of the region. Unsport coastline, idyllic seaside towns, sprawling agricultural land, national parks, rarest species of flora and fauna. And I thought to myself, well, in reality, those attributes that you're associating yourself with are very marketable in a premium food and beverage space. And I just wanted to give you one example of a product and a company that I've had the pleasure of meeting with. And I first came across the Epic bison bars, which was the first product of theirs that I saw. I think it was around 2014, 2015 in the US. Interestingly, the Epic company, which makes a range of meat and protein bars, was started by 2 vegans. I know that sounds a little confusing, but what those 2 people were able to identify was key market demand trends effectively. What were people looking for in terms of some of those food mega trends? So, some of those trends that they captured at the time around people wanting high protein, people wanting low fat, people wanting low sugar, people wanting ethically sourced product, people wanting chemical-free product. Taylor and Katie, who formed Epic back in 2013, saw an opportunity to source product, and they've got a range of products, and I'll show you a couple of their products, but to source products that met those attributes and then focus in on what they thought was a key market segment. So their first year of trading, 2014, their first full year of trading, they, from memory, I think that they had sales of 15 million in 2014. In 2015, they had sales of 20 million. In 2016, General Mills bought Epic for 820 million. So in terms of a rapid growth curve, they're certainly a success story. Part of the acquisition of General Mills was that Taylor and Katie were actually retained by General Mills, and if you look at all the PR around the Epic range, they've been very careful to ensure that in that acquisition that they haven't lost some of those key attributes that people associate with the founders of that company. But when I looked at Epic and what they'd done, and you look at the attributes that they're marketing, they're effectively marketing the attributes that you guys have as a region: pure, clean, product that's ability to source products from ethical producers. The animal welfare issues, obviously, key topic at the moment here. But the story behind their product is linked to attributes that you actually have as a region. The other thing that's interesting about these products is that if you look at the price of those products, so one of those bars, 37-gram bar, you're paying $3.20 American, so I guess it's up around $4 Australian for one of those bars. You equate that back in terms of the dollar per kilo rate for that product, and you're up over $100 a kilo for your input product. In this case, beef. But interestingly, when you go through their product range, again, there's an alignment with this region. So you look at they've got the protein bars, but then they've got the protein bites, one of which is salmon. And they've diversified out, obviously, into chicken bites and beef bites. And again, all of these things with that core story behind them. And then beyond that, then there's the use of some of the, I guess, other portions of the animal in terms of, we might not think that selling pork fat, beef tallow, duck fat would be key markets, but they're able to attract a high premium for those supplementary products as well. The thought I had when I looked at Epic and looked at their growth, and having that opportunity to meet with them when I was in the US about 1.5 years ago, really interesting story, but really based around focusing on some of those mega trends and then saying, can we produce a product that aligns with those mega trends and is therefore going to be highly marketable? Just really quickly, and I'm going to ask John to say a few words, John Berry, who works with us, in terms of food industry innovation and what we're doing in that space. We recognise that we've got some really interesting, innovative, exciting businesses here in Western Australia. Invariably, they're faced with some key challenges. And if I get back to that earlier point about being able to differentiate and compete, had a chat yesterday morning with a pork producer from the Margaret River region. And, the core statement he made to me was, Kim, it's impossible for me to compete with $3 a kilo Canadian pork landing in Western Australia. And realistically, the only way, simply through scale of production, the only way we can compete is if our product is differentiated in the market, because we cannot produce, I certainly don't know anyone of small to medium scale who can produce pork in Western Australia for $3 a kilo. So if we're trying to compete in that commodity space, we're going to struggle because we generally don't have the scale. But if we're able to differentiate our product and separate it from that generalised product, then in our opinion, there's an opportunity there for growth. Our work's really been around what does industry tell us are their needs in terms of going forward, and how do we support that? So that's been through a range of training and development programs. They've been very well attended. We recognise that we don't really have a homogenous client group. One day we'll be dealing with someone who's making cider, another day someone making beer, another day someone making cheese, another day someone making beef jerky. But there are some core needs that businesses have expressed to us as being things they need assistance with. So there's been a range of training and development workshops, ranging from things like e-commerce through to business planning. A recent one that was very well attended was the country of origin labelling legislation, which companies right through from companies like Browns and Kalis Brothers through to quite small companies found very interesting. So really that's all based on demand as reflected to us by the clients. John will talk more about some of the other programs, our study tour program, our Expert for a Day program that was recently launched. These are effectively the offerings of the Food Industry Innovation program to try and assist businesses with their growth. And John, I'll ask you to come forward and say a few more words. And the last part of the presentation, the next presentation is a video with our a good friend of the project, Professor David Hughes, who's we've had him over a few times, and he always talks about these key mega trends and the fact that he believes Western Australia is really well positioned to take advantage of some of these. But we don't underestimate the challenges associated with some of the costs of production and the isolation of Western Australia, particularly our distance from markets. So John, I'll ask you to just say a few more words about some of the food industry innovation offerings.
I've actually got a couple of minutes now, and also at the end I wanted to say a couple of words about what the actual programs that we're running are, and there's a wealth of actual existing programs that are out there, but we want to try and sharpen the focus of those programs onto the food and beverage sector. So put a bit of horsepower into that, because sometimes you get a bit lost because it's quite a sort of, not a disparate might not be the right word, but there's not a strong network of businesses that actually communicate together and advocate to government. So we want to sort of try and put a bit of elevation of that into place. Excuse me. On your desks, there's a card that looks like that. If you have a look at that, that's a program that we've just recently launched. It's called Expert for a Day, and the intent of that is to try and develop sort of some skills and professional development for businesses. But what we're trying not to do is say this is what you need. What we're going to try and say is you identify what you think you need, and we'll try and co-create or co-design some programs to meet your needs. And on the back of that card, you can see things like branding, labelling and marketing, e-commerce, logistics, sales capacity. Those sort of things have come out of the Premium Market Opportunities report that Kim mentioned, and particularly marketing. That was something that came out a lot. That how do we get into not only domestic market, but in the long run, the export market, and what are the regulations? So I think Russell's might be talking a bit about industry and infrastructure, which is his role in the region with the Great Southern Development Commission. What we're talking about here is how do we upskill and look at the human capacity, because it's actually people on farms running businesses that are doing their day-to-day work and often don't have time to go and upskill themselves and get professional development. So we want to help with that through a range of programs, and Kim mentioned things like study tours, getting experts in to help support what you're doing, and having some group networking. And I'll talk a little bit towards the end of the session for those who can remain throughout the whole day about a exercise we want to do to try and get that better cohesion and sort of act as a bit of a glue to try and bring the industry together. We're starting that out in a virtual sense through a closed Facebook page, and I think also on your desks there's a little card, that Nikki's holding up. I might have one in here. It looks like that, which is which we're only just about to launch. But that's a sort of a virtual forum, recognising that the geography of the state is so big. There's lots of small producers. So this can be a forum where you can get generate ideas, learn about what others are doing, and access a whole lot of resources. So I'll say a few more words towards the end of the day, but just be aware, think about as the day progresses, what sort of expertise you might want, and just remember there are federal and state grants to help you realise your visions. So I'll just leave it at that, given the time. Thanks.